Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter. Joined as always by managing editor of the site, Ross Binder, and of course, our publisher, Adam Jacoby. Before we get started, make sure that you subscribe wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, hit that like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking of yesterday's victory for the Iowa Hawkeyes, taking the 38-21 win over Troy of the Sun Belt. And we would be doing you a disservice if we talked about anybody else besides Kaleb Johnson to start this podcast, leading the country in rushing. 5 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns. Remind me, is it 5?
It is 6,
6.
amigo. 479 yards, 6 touchdowns, already outpacing his entire 2023 season. And he is running better than ever, guys. Everything the coaches have been telling Kaleb Johnson about running behind your pads, finish hard, use that God-given strength and size to punish defenders. He's putting that together this season, and the results are obvious, guys.
Yeah, there's a distinct difference in Kaleb Johnson from years 1 and 2, especially year 2 to now here where we are in year 3. There's a couple differences, and you mentioned getting behind the pads. That's one, and that's something that we've heard from KJ for the last 2 years. But it's in getting behind the pads, it's not just actively trying to beat everyone with his speed on every rep, right? It's embracing contact, and by embracing contact, he's breaking through tackles, he's plowing through guys, and this is the thing that would take his game to the next level that we've talked about the last couple seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the physicality he was running with, all season, but definitely yesterday was just, readily apparent. And he was dragging guys for multiple yards and, just busting through tackle attempts. And, there was just really, really impressive hard running from Kaleb Johnson, in addition to, reading the holes well. And, the speed has always been there, still there. And so, yeah, he just really feels like the total package at running back right now, which is really exciting to see. We've seen the glimpses from him the first couple years, and now it just seems like it's all blossoming. To me, Adam, he looks like the best running back Iowa's had since Sean Green. Is that where your thoughts go also, or would you
Yeah,
not to, I was gonna say
I would
not
say so.
not to slight Tyler Goodson or Akram Wadley and some other very good running backs Iowa's had since then, but uh,
I think the comp to Sean Green is accurate because Kaleb Johnson is the first back that Iowa's had where he has a legitimate shot to lead the nation in rushing, right? He has a legitimate shot to at the very least contend for 100 yards per game in every game like Sean Green had in 2008. And that's really saying something, especially considering that Green only had one half to do that against Illinois State, and he did it. But yeah, uh, we're talking about some pretty rarefied air, and it's especially Eliot. I would say it's especially notable because we were told even coming into the season, and last season was proof that the running back depth chart is probably the most fluid on the team, right? Like it was always it was the hot hand last year. And now when we talk to the coaches, and like even when we talked to Liddell Betts before or last week, he said, if Kaleb Johnson's not in there, it's just because he's getting a breather. Like that is such a sea change from, hey, whoever's running hard, he's going to get the rock.
Yeah, and you've got 4 running backs on this roster that they've clearly shown enough trust in to play on a regular basis. especially last year in Jazz Patterson and Leishon, and when Jazz wasn't hurt specifically. And Jazz came on the field yesterday, and again against Troy late in the game. Troy's beat up, but Jazz came on the field yesterday and looked awesome. He had 70 some rushing yards, and he's still that same running back that just hits the hole, right? And that was part of our issue with Kaleb Johnson last year, where it's just like there's a hole, hit it, man. Like that's why Jazz was having success, and Caleb's doing that now. But Kamari Moulton's in the fold. Leishon Williams, we've barely seen at this point in the season. He was, if there was a bell cow last year, it was Leishon, mostly because of health, and it looked like he may have re-aggravated that injury that he sustained in camp. So that's something to keep an eye on. But if any, I mean, this is probably, if not the deepest position on the team, one of the deepest positions, and Kaleb Johnson has established himself as head and shoulders the best running back on the roster. That's not something that's easy to do. And this is another thing that we've talked about repeatedly. I've talked about in this podcast, other podcasts, is he is clear and away the most talented running back on the team. And now it's being put together. It's one of those things that's really gratifying to see, because everybody could see the talent, right? You could see it come through. You could see those big runs. And occasionally he would get behind his pads and be like, do that all the time. And now he's doing it. And he is far and away the best option for the offense right now. I mean, a lot of the time in these first few games, it's like, just hand the ball to Kaleb and get the hell out of the way. Like, right?
Yeah, the one thing that I'll add is that, especially against Troy, that was a team rushing performance, and it wasn't just handed to Kaleb. You know, you could hand it to Kamari Moulton, you could hand it to Jazz Patterson. Altogether, those three running backs, Johnson, Moulton, and I have already spaced on his
Jazz Patterson?
And Jazz Patterson. Yes, thank you. Good Lord. Kick in caffeine. Altogether, 288 rushing yards on 37 carries. That's an average for those three guys combined of 7.8 yards per rush. And that's against Troy. You know, it's not even against Illinois State. It's not against a team that has some significant disadvantages. And, you know, Troy, even Kirk Ferentz said it, they came to win on Saturday, and they made that a competitive game for most of the duration of it. So the fact that I was able to clear out those holes, it starts with the offensive line, obviously, but then it's also a matter of a very talented stable of running backs who are really starting to buy into what Liddell Betts has been coaching them up on. They're really hitting their pocket of maturity where you want to see their potential really start to come out. Kirk, mentioned that both Jazz and Kaleb are in their third year in the league, or excuse me, in the program. And year three, especially at Iowa, is the like, all right, what are you capable of? Like, what do we bring you in here for? And you see it click with all these guys. You even saw it with Leishon last year. And yet, Eliot, you mentioned the word gratifying. I think that's the perfect word for this, to see all that potential really turn into productivity. And it's helping Iowa win games.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely accurate. Eliot, you mentioned, you just want to see them, or just want to see him hand the ball off to Kaleb, and that's exactly what Iowa fans were saying last week. Not to dwell on the Iowa State loss anymore, but what was one of the major complaints was those goal line possessions when Kaleb Johnson did not touch the ball. That was not an issue this week, because he either touched the ball when they got near the goal line and scored one short touchdown, or he and the other running backs just scored from far outside the red zone. You don't have to worry about red zone play calling when you can score from 35 yards out. So yeah, I think, you mentioned it too. We've seen flashes from Kaleb last year and as a freshman, and it really just feels like he's putting it together much more consistently now. And obviously the difficulty is going to ramp up in Big Ten play, but you could not ask for more from him from the first three games. And he's only played 2.5 games technically than what he's given you. So that has to feel really good, I think, especially if you're Liddell Betts and Tim Lester and Kirk Ferentz looking at this offense. you have to be really excited about what he can give you with the Big Ten season starting next week.
And you know what else is a big difference for Kaleb Johnson? This offensive line has taken a huge step forward, especially in run blocking.
Huge.
This is a different offensive line. There are going to be plays where things break down. Luke Lachey missed a key block on that 4th and short yesterday. And because of how much the offensive line has struggled over the last few years, I think a lot of people are going to default into blaming the offensive line for issues, into saying, oh, you need to move on from George Barnett next season. Well, things are starting to come together, man. And no, it's not like the monsters of the Midway, right? Like Tristan Wirfs isn't on this offensive line anymore. They don't have that guy who's the clear NFL guy, but Mason Richmond's healthy. Bo Stevens is starting to play like that 4-star prospect he was. Logan Jones missed a blitz yesterday, but I mean, he's kind of the anchor of this offensive line. Connor Colby has been playing for a long time. Jennings Dunker has stepped up big time. His PFF grade has gone up astronomically. And they don't have, the big athletes, but they're getting push, man. They're getting push. And you've seen it in these first few games.
Yeah, you absolutely have. And, I think we can start with Jennings Dunker because in terms of that big imposing presence on the line, like, yeah, Mason Richmond is not your Tristan Wirfs sort of guy, but just even looking at last year to this year, the physical progression of Dunker, like he is a huge, lean dude. He's a mauler now. He was a big dude last season, but he's really starting to look like what you want a dominant right tackle to be, and it's showing up on the field. It's not just show muscles or anything like that, but one, he is bigger. Two, he is blowing guys off the line, and even when he's doing the pregame drills where you're working through the gates and then you're dribbling the medicine ball on the 30-yard line, you see like he's even putting extra oomph into that too, and you're like, I've never felt sorry for a medicine ball before. Like, I've never thought, should we get the medicine ball its own medicine? But
Yeah.
like, go ahead, Ross.
No, go ahead, finish up what you were saying about Dunker.
Yeah, so the one thing that I will point out, some of our eagle-eyed fans might have noticed that Dunker came out earlier than everybody else in the game. I talked to Kirk Ferentz after the game about that. Sounds like it was just cramps for him, so he's expected to be good to go on that front. And then on the rest of the line, they've been healthy so far through 3 games, and we know that Mason Richmond was never healthy last year, or rarely healthy. And we know that these lingering injuries can, not necessarily keep a guy off the field, but they can keep him from playing at 100%. And so far, we've seen a very clean injury report for that offensive line. And that has such a profound impact on the way that it actually performs and the cohesion that front 5 unit has. So the one other comparison to 2008's rushing game is, if you watch that that iconic Sean Green performance against Wisconsin, that 219 4 TD performance, like, yeah, great performance by Sean Green in that game, but he's running through wide open holes. And if you watch that Troy game, it's a great performance by Iowa's running backs to get to 8 yards of pop, but they're running through some awfully large holes too, including Jazz Patterson, including Kamari Molden, especially in that second half. And I asked Mason Richmond about it, and he said, yeah, injuries were a part of that for Troy, but he said, yeah, you could feel them starting to wear out as the game goes on. And, Ross, if you're an offensive lineman and you start to feel a little bit of give up from that guy across the line from you, oh, that is such a profound motivator.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just said is what I was going to point out, which was that the running backs were great yesterday, but they were able to be great because the offensive line was doing a phenomenal job at the point of attack on so many of those runs of just opening up huge lanes for them. So like they were able to get to the line, get past the line of scrimmage without anybody even touching them on several of those runs, and that was true credit to the offensive line. Like you said, they were just bullying Troy's defense, especially as the game went on. They were wearing down, fatigue, injury, just the scoreboard, all of that. they were not what they were at the start of the game, and the running backs were more than happy to take advantage of that. But yeah, I thought we saw a lot of good things from the offensive line in run blocking, especially yesterday. Adam?
One more thing that I'll just point out, this is also an effect of the Tim Lester offense and how much they like to get up to that line with pace, get set, run a motion, and go. So it doesn't give the defense the time to, catch its breath. It doesn't really allow them to, read, react, and all that. And so again, that's another area where having Tim Lester control this show is paying major dividends for the offense as a whole.
Now, while we're talking about the offensive line, talking about Tim Lester, of course, we posted on our premium board to see if any of our subscribers any thoughts, any questions, anything at all. And this morning, RRH Hawk said, after we just got done praising Tim Lester, he said, please discuss the worst play call ever on 4th and inches in the first quarter. So I already hit it with the Luke Lachey missed block. But Adam, one thing you mentioned is it was slow developing. I think it was 12 personnel too. It's just like no fullback in there. Like with Lachey missing that block, Hayden Large can excuse me. That came from my toes. Hayden Large
He's allergic to missed blocks.
Yeah. Hayden Large can come in and take over, right? And fix that situation more or less, right? And so I tweeted this too, as I said, I felt like I could tell that was going to be a turnover on downs before the snap.
Yeah, I think about 69,000 fans in the stadium could tell too. And, there was no misdirection. There was no lead block. There was no, again, it was slow developing, and there was nothing to make the linebackers not hit that hole as quickly as possible. And then when you throw in a key miss block by Lachey, and, somebody else on Twitter was saying that he's started to regress in run blocking this year. I haven't, looked to double check that or, scoured the film or anything like that. But at a minimum, that was a really bad missed rep. But I'm not even sure that Iowa converts that if Lachey, clears it out. It has a fighting chance, but it's no guarantee too, because again, that play call just did not put them in position to succeed. So hopefully that's the last time we see Iowa, run that on 4th and inches. But, when we're talking about plays like that in a 17-point win as as something to gripe about, there aren't a whole lot of things, at least on the offense.
I was just going to say that, at least offense. Now, before we flip to the defense, I do want to talk about quarterback a little bit. Cade and I was part of the group for a little while that was like, this is fine. This isn't necessarily good quarterback play. But then you look at the stats and he's 19 of 23 for 173 yards. That's not phenomenal. 0 interceptions, 0 touchdowns, which he had his longest completion, I think, of the season, 33 yards to Caden Weegan, had an 18-yard completion to Kaleb Brown, first catch of the season, which we'll talk about that momentarily as well. But at some point, there are a couple things. The arm strength is just not there, right? With Cade, it's just not. I think we can all agree with that. And because of that lack of arm strength, he misses throws. So that's a situation that is an issue with the offense. At the same time, 19 of 23, 173 yards. Like, is this what Cade just kind of needs to be with this offense? Able to complete passes. Kaleb Johnson just goes nuts. Offensive line handles things. Odd defense, as long as they don't allow these big plays, they were pretty good yesterday. I mean, of course you want Caleb Williams, right? Like, of course you want that type of play. And of course, you want the offense to click from, start to finish. But this isn't like one thing. I was walking and leaving the stadium with Lystico last night, and we were talking about this, and I said, this isn't a video game, man. Like, you got human beings out there. It's not going to be perfect from start to finish. And whether that goes for offensive line, defense, quarterback play, I specifically think quarterback play here. I guess what are your guys' thoughts on that, like on Cade's quarterback play? Because like you can't really complain about 19 to 23, but at the same time with the eye test, it was just kind of like, Leh.
It was a weird game to me, I thought, watching it, because the accuracy was there. You can't, the stats are very plain in black and white. He completed 83% of his passes. You would take that, every single game, I think. And that's this sort of completion percentage Iowa quarterbacks have not seen in a very long time. That's not something we've seen out of any quarterback at Iowa for several years. But at the same time, that lack of an explosive, downfield threat or even attempt was a little concerning. So it was very strange, because, if he plays like that against Iowa State, Iowa's 3-0 and everyone feels a lot better. But, he didn't play like that in that game. And this game, there's going to be it was Troy, which is to some extent, an accurate caveat. But, we all also have to see what, he can do in the weeks that, come next. But, I think mostly with Cade, if he can make the plays that are there, that's going to put the Iowa offense in a position to succeed. And he did a much better job of that yesterday. That was clear. Like he was hitting guys. There were not a lot of bad throws where the receivers really had to work hard to catch the ball, which was an improvement. But yeah, the lack of downfield targets is something I think to watch very closely, because I'm not sure how sustainable that is over an entire season. It worked fine yesterday, but unless the running game probably isn't going to have 280 yards in every game, so might be some need for more yardage in the passing game in the future. But Adam, what did you see?
So there was a stretch where McNamara completed 11 straight passes, which is, objectively phenomenal. Anybody would take 11 straight completions by their quarterback any day of the week. Here is the formula for how fans can be underwhelmed by 11 straight completions. Here's the yardage of the completions to start the stretch of 11. 2-yard pass, 7-yard pass, 5-yard pass, 3-yard pass, 5-yard pass, right? Like, these are dink and dunks, and he's taken what the defense is giving him, but there was only one first down in those first 5 completions. And then, that pocket also includes, the big play to Weegan. It includes the first downs to Gill and Lachey. Like, there are 4 first downs out of those 11 completions. But then at the end of it, it was that, Eliot, it was that series in the middle of the third quarter where it goes 1st and 10, 3-yard loss to Estrenga. 2nd and 13, they go back to Estrenga, no gain. 3rd and 13, he misses Bowie. And then Iowa's got a punt from its own 39, right? And that was that stretch where everyone's like, oh God, like this is what we're getting with Cade too, So yeah, Ross, I would agree that the lack of downfield targeting is concerning. And I've seen some thoughts from people who know this sort of thing more than I do. Like Kirk Ferentz, I am not a QB expert, but there's a lot of concern that McNamara is not fully like torquing his lower body, that he's basically just throwing with his upper arm strength or upper body strength. And, that can get the ball 45 yards. But if you've got a Hail Mary at the 50, you need a little bit more full body torque in these things. And I know it's a lot easier said than done, because I'm the one sitting on his butt in front of a laptop, and I'm not the one with two surgically repaired knee ligaments. So, I get it. It's a lot easier said than done, but it really does seem that if McNamara is, throwing the way that he is right now, if that's just, what he is, Eliot, as you said, um, Iowa does need to adjust for that, compensate for it somehow. And if that turns into another season of defenses not having to respect the deep ball and like cover zeros and cover ones all over the place, then yeah, that's going to start to pose a little bit of a problem for the rush game as they head into Big Ten season.
And I think, I mean, in the adjustments that they made offensively to result in 19 of 23, right? It's something that Ross already said is they kind of went away from the deep ball. Like that 33-yard completion to Caden Weegan, he probably caught 20 yards and ran it for 13, right? Like it's kind of just what you're going to get. And with that in mind, don't you think that you want to get the ball more to Kaleb Brown to make plays in space, right? Like for him to have one catch through 2 games, like he didn't play in the first game, is crazy. Because I mean, and again, we don't have to rehash it, but Cade just flat out missed that deep ball to Kaleb that probably would have won them the Iowa State game. And so you have to adjust to what your players can do. And with what Cade can do, you got to get the ball to playmakers in these short situations. Like Kaleb caught, I think it was like 11 yards downfield and then made a couple guys miss, broke some tackles, made it to 18 yards. Like if you're going to run the offense like this, you have to get the ball into guys like him. And Anyang .063 on the premium board mentioned it. He's like, is it borderline criminal that we haven't seen Kaleb Brown get more playing time? Like there's the one catch, and then there's him just really not seeing the field all that much. And like TJ Washington got the start yesterday. And like Jacob Gill's been good. And I think he's been kind of a foundation for the wide receiver core to move forward. But he doesn't have that playmaking ability like Kaleb Brown, right? Like, and I had a feeling this would happen with him missing the first game, that it would just be like a slow, like maybe, okay, now he's starting to get involved. I mean, to me, it's one of those situations where it's the most talented guy in the core, in the receiving core, and he's just not out there.
Well, it's pretty reminiscent of last season too, isn't it? Because it took a long time for Brown to, work his way into the rotation. And I know that he sort of fell out of favor with Ferentz in the middle of the season last season too. So at the very least, he got the doghouse out of the way before the season kicked off in 2024. So there's that. But yeah, he does have some work to do, clearly, to work back into the rotation and start to get more snaps, because Eliot, like you said, from a pure talent standpoint, from a pure playmaking standpoint, he is head and shoulders above the rest of the receiving core as of right now. It's just a matter of, how much does the team trust him? How much do the coaches trust him? But, ultimately, even if all you're doing is watching the pregame warmups, when they're running those, fade route warm-up tosses before they're doing the 11 on 11s. I mean, Kaleb's out there snagging them one-handed for funsies. That's just playmaking talent. There's only so much you can coach that. And so clearly there's got to be some way to get Kaleb Brown and the coaching staff, on the same page. And maybe it is a year 3 thing, just the same way as it was with Kaleb Johnson. We do have to remember, this is only his second year in Iowa City. And, Kaleb Brown didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare for, the Hawkeye offense, the Hawkeye culture, the Hawkeye everything, transferring from Ohio State last season. So this is, he's still incorporating his way into this process, and he didn't even play receiver in high school, yada, yada, yada. This isn't excuse hour or anything like that, but He is pretty clearly still a work in progress, and I do think it is fair to want to see him on the field and really turn that potential into production a little bit more often than we're seeing already. Because yeah, the receiving core has been fine, but they just don't have his ability to turn, big plays into bigger plays. Ross, what did you have?
I was just gonna, highlight he played 7 snaps yesterday, according
Yeah.
to Pro Football Focus. That is the fewest of any receiver except for Caden Weechin, who was only on the field for 1 snap, but he made the most of that 1 snap on offense. But yeah, I mean, you had Bowie, Gill, Howard, Washington, and Vanderzee all playing more snaps than Kaleb Brown, and there are some other good receivers, but that's a tough look with the talent that Kaleb has and what he can provide to this offense, which we've seen. We saw it with his catch and run yesterday. Yeah, we saw it in that Iowa State game. They didn't hit it, but he got behind the defense and is that explosive weapon that is there. And there's just got to be Iowa doesn't have enough playmakers like that, especially at the receiver position, to not, I think, better utilize a player of his ability. So that's going to be a really big, I think, task for the next few weeks. Eliot, were you going to say something?
Oh no, I was Hawks a fly 101789. Really appreciate the username there, pal, on the premium board. Was he was wondering about the issue as well. So he was just like, is Kaleb hurt? Is he not perform? Is he in Kirk's doghouse? Like, I really, I mean, is it that? Like, is it? I really think it's what I mentioned a moment ago of like he misses the first game and then things just kind of start off kilter for him.
Yeah, he's certainly not hurt.
No.
We've seen him on the field and he's perfectly physically capable and all that. I think the coaches are just sort of waiting for him to take charge and grab that WR1 spot on the depth chart and keep it. And so far he hasn't done that yet. So maybe some of it's coaching, maybe some of it's the rotations that they've got, but also the ball is in Kaleb Brown's court at this point too. That's a mixed sport reference right there.
The ball is in his court and the ball is not in his hands.
And it's on the 50-yard line.
So of all the things that went wrong and right offensively yesterday, the main issues right now are defense and special teams, which is not something that any of us thought we were going to be talking about going into this coming week for Iowa. At least the issues from this more recent game and the game before that were what happened on defense. Big plays that don't typically happen against the Hawkeye defense. First play, TJ Hall just bit on a double move and got beat for a 63-yard touchdown. Second one was a breakdown in coverage. There were some conversations out there and you look at that and it's, oh, that's TJ Hall's fault too. Get him off the field. And we were thinking the same thing. Turns out in coverage and watching replay, it was Quinn Schulte that made that mistake there. But uncharacteristic mistakes for the Hawkeyes so far. And do I think they figure it out as the season goes? I do. But it happened on defense and special teams, and I never put it out yesterday. I never really put an article or anything like that, but man, this team misses Cooper DeJean. Cooper makes a play on, I think, all of those plays, right? Like special teams and breakdown and coverage, like whatever, on the last touchdown by Devontae Ross, who scored all 3 touchdowns. The first one, like I said, TJ Hall just bit. The punt return, Xavier Wampa looked like he was running in quicksand trying to make a play. That entire right side of the field was not covered. I just like, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Is this just like, okay, it happened, we move on, they're gonna figure it out, or is this a long-term concern for this team? Because these aren't things that we've seen. I mean, we tried looking it up before the podcast to give you a frame of reference. Iowa hasn't allowed a punt return for a touchdown in over a decade. We couldn't even find the stat of the last time they did it because it wasn't online. So where are you guys at with it? I'll go to you here first, Ross. Where are you at with the big plays being allowed by defense and special teams?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it is extremely uncharacteristic for those units. It's not what we have come to expect from Phil Parker or LeVar Woods, uh, units at all. But I would kind of separate them. To me, the punt return felt more fluky to me. It was a poor punt return, a poor punt from Dakin. It was just a low line drive punt, so that made it much more returnable. And the coverage was not good. Like you said, the right side just, there was no contain there. And once Ross got to the sideline, he was just gone. Like there was nobody catching him. But to me, that seems much more correctable. It's not something we've seen at all. Obviously, like you said, over a decade since the punt return touchdown that Iowa's conceded. So I think that'll get corrected. And as far as Dakin is concerned, his 2 punts in the third quarter were much better. He got much more hang time, much more distance. There was no possibility of a return even on those kicks. One of them was almost flawless. He was very close to just back spinning it down inside like the half-yard line right outside the goal line. So to me, that's going to get better, and there isn't as much to worry about. The defense, though, I mean, this is now 3 big, 60-plus yard touchdowns that have been allowed by the defense in 2 games, which, for comparison, they gave up 2 60-plus yard plays all of last season over 14 games. So that's a little more alarming. The Hall had some issues yesterday. Schulte had issues. So we've just seen a few more breakdowns. And like you said, that the lack of that linchpin guy in the secondary, like a Cooper, like DeJean was, is a little bit more telling than I think we had thought or hoped it would be heading into the season. Like, it's like, oh, you don't, lose a guy as good as Cooper and not feel it. But it's like, there's a lot of other good defensive backs there. They'll be okay. Well, there are definitely some issues there. They're going to have to tighten up. And so that's going to be a big area for me to watch. And I'm concerned about that area because not so much about Minnesota next week. I don't think their passing attack is anything particularly formidable. But in 3 weeks, Iowa goes to Columbus to face Ohio State, who, as always, has a fleet of receivers who are just ready to wreak havoc on a pass defense. So that's a game that the secondary is really going to have to be at the top of their game for Iowa to have even a ghost of a chance at. Adam, what were you seeing from those units yesterday?
Yeah, when you're facing Ohio State, those receivers can make plays even when your defender's in position, right? That is there's some prayer involved in defending that pass attack. But
like we saw against Iowa State.
Right. Yeah, that is. And now imagine that a team has 10 Noel Devines or Jalen Noels.
Mecca Egbuka,
yeah,
Jeremiah Smith,
yeah, give them Noel Devine while you're at it too, like the high school mixtape Noel Devine. But anyway, but when we're looking at what Iowa's defense is struggling with right now, some of it is just being caught out of position. Some of it is absolutely missing a guy like Cooper DeJean who can just lock up anybody. And what makes DeJean so special is when you've got one complete lockdown corner, you can start shifting that safety help to the other side of the field. You can start making everybody else's job easier. Right now, Iowa doesn't have that, not to spam the Fryisms here, but they don't have that bell cow in the secondary right now, or at the very least, not at cornerback. And so all of a sudden the job's a little bit tougher, right? All of a sudden Quinn Schulte doesn't know if he needs to peel off to help the guy who's running a post route and who's probably breaking open, or the guy who's breaking open on the fly route because TJ Hall thinks that he's got deep help. That is sort of the stress point that Iowa is not in as much when they've got an elite cornerback. Right now, I don't think you can call Jamari Harris elite. You certainly can't call TJ Hall elite at this point. Can't really call Deshaun Lee elite at this point. Do they have that potential? Absolutely. And there's a bevy of guys who are young and hungry and really waiting to compete for those snaps too. But by and large, this is what losing a playmaker, who really should have gone in the first round of the NFL draft, by the way, really should have gone in the first round. But when you lose a guy like Cooper DeJean, this is kind of what you are, or this is what Cooper took off the board for other teams, like you mentioned, Eliot. I agree that he probably would have made plays on at least two of those three long touchdowns. Now, we should also mention that Devontae Ross is almost certainly going to the NFL. Should be playing, Power Four football next year. He was a Kentucky commit originally, but I think he is almost certainly NFL material and probably a second contract kind of guy in the league, because that is speed that you can't teach. That's speed that you make one false step at cornerback and you're dusted. I'm not going to compare him directly to Tyreek Hill, but that is sort of the stress that he can put on a secondary. And you saw it even against a great secondary like Iowa's. Now, Minnesota's not going to, be able to make, that many plays, presumably. But, when Troy's third string QB can dust your cornerback by 15 yards, that is a sign that there is some improvement that needs to be made. And it is going to require a little bit more creativity out of Phil Parker this season because he can't just spam, quarter coverage, knowing that, or, those cover sixes where you're like, all right, Cooper, you got these, you got this third, everybody else on this side. You can't really fall back on the base defense. And we're starting to see defenses figure out where the soft spots are on the perimeter. We're starting to see where the defenses can start to manipulate Iowa's deep coverage a little bit. So obviously, I think there does need to be some improvement in terms of how Iowa's calling its plays and its coverages, and also some improvement in execution, clearly. But yeah, right now, it's hard to argue that Iowa does not have a big play problem on both defense and special teams right now.
There were a couple things that you mentioned there, Adam, and the first one that I think we have to address is Jamari Harris being a good corner, like full stop, good corner.
Yeah. Yep.
Had that pick six yesterday. I wanted to talk about that today. He deserves the praise. That was also just a bad read by the quarterback. And you could see it going right to Jamari right when he released it. But Jamari made the play, right? He made the play. He caught the pick and he ran it back for a touchdown. He said that was the last time he scored, or the first time he scored since he was a senior in high school. So good for him there.
One real quick thing here. He also mentioned that the reason that he was in position to make that play was it was the exact same look that they had shown on the first snap of the game. And so he knew, okay, if you're going to do that, and then that is, what you get out of Phil Parker corner. And so, really good play, really good recognition on his part to be in position to make that play. But anyway, keep going.
He is a really, really solid complement to a cornerback like Cooper DeJean, who is elite, right? Who is among the best in the country, who's an All-American, a first-team All-American. To have him be cornerback one is good, right? It's not elite. And to have backup corners, TJ Hall getting burned, from Hans 81 on the board, he said, do you think the staff thought about replacing him in the lineup, at least for a series or two, perhaps with Nestor? Deshaun Lee did replace him at one point. Deshaun was solid last year, another guy who's good. Jamari's another tier of good, but Deshaun's good. He's not a big play corner. He's not Cooper DeJean, right? But he's solid. He's good in coverage. He does this job. And so I think if you're going to reach a level of, if there's anybody that's going to reach that level of maybe not even elite, but good to another tier, like between Jamari and Cooper, it's probably Nestor. I just don't know that he's there yet, right? Like if he was there, he'd be on the field. Like Phil Parker wouldn't be keeping him off the field. So maybe this is a situation where we see more of Deshaun Lee and John Nestor next week, because John Nestor is still playing special teams. Deshaun Lee was still getting reps on defense. John Nestor made the biggest play on special teams yesterday by recovering that muff punt by Caden Weegan.
Yeah.
So there are still options. Like, and is it all at the fault of TJ Hall? No. Did he make a mistake in that big play? Did he bite? Yeah. And was there a breakdown in coverage after that? Yeah. This might just be a year where you see some of those big plays happen because you don't have the athlete, you don't have that elite corner play like a Cooper DeJean. You just don't.
One more thing that I'll just point out here in terms of the effect that not having a Cooper DeJean has on this offense. We're through 3 games and Sebastian Castro doesn't have a single tackle for loss. And that's because he's spending more time in coverage. He doesn't have that ability to just dive bomb what's going to be a pretty obvious rushing play and, wipe it out from the start like we saw so many times last season. So if there's a way for Iowa to reincorporate him into that rush defense to, a greater degree than we've been seeing so far, we know Phil Parker would gladly take that. But right now, we're not seeing Iowa really disrupt that line of scrimmage with that cashbacker the way that we've seen in years past.
That's a really good point, and it's unfortunate because that takes away a dynamic of Castro's game that makes him Castro, right? Just being a missile, and being able to go and make those plays in the backfield, and you got to make adjustments, right? Like, would you rather have him and trying to make a play and the defense gets beat over the top for more touchdowns?
Yeah. How bad do you want that football flying over his helmet?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Ross, did you have something you wanted to say there?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of piggyback on your point about, this might be a year where the defense gives up more big plays. And it certainly seems that way, through the first 3 games. That's where we're headed. And, that just kind of, definitely reduces the margin of error for this team and this defense. And it puts more stress on the offense to actually score points. In the last couple of years, we've seen a situation where, the offense could get away with scoring, not that many points because the defense could be relied on to hold teams under, 10, 13 points on a very consistent basis. And that might not be the case this year, which is going to put more stress on the offense to actually score points. The good news is that I think we have seen through 3 weeks an offense that is actually capable of doing that with, the improved health and experience at several positions with Tim Lester and some changes on the scheme. I was averaging over 30 points a game and over 400 yards of offense through these first 3 weeks. So there are some definitely good things to like there, and that maybe the offense actually can make up for, if the defense isn't at the level that it's been the last couple of years, which it doesn't quite seem to be there.
One more stat for you guys in terms of big plays. Right now, Iowa is second to last in the nation in punt return yards allowed, average punt return yards allowed, because they've only had 2 returns, and one of them was at 77-yarder, the other one was -1. So they're allowing 38 yards per return. Only Boise State is worse as of right now. But to that point, was there any special teams coordinator in the nation that you would trust more to fix this than LeVar Woods? Is there any defensive coordinator in the nation that you would trust more to clean up the big play give ups than Phil Parker? Right, these guys have earned their benefit of the doubt. And, now it's time to prove it again because there are things that do need to be cleaned up. Absolutely. But, this staff in particular, the way it's set up right now is better set up to clean those mistakes up as opposed to letting them become season-long problems than basically anybody in college football. And I don't think that's exaggeration. I'm certainly not trying to, candor here. You know, those guys have earned their benefit of the doubt.
The other thing that I think we need to talk about in the defense allowing these big plays and the offense, I think I saw somewhere that they rank 54th in the country right now, which is, last year with that offense, they would have been maybe national champions. And we've talked about that a long time. We've said if they're 90th in the country in offense, that team maybe goes undefeated last season. But they weren't. And now they're top 60, and the defense is just not, it's just not top 10. And special teams is just not top 10 in the country right now. So you're gonna lose games like they did to Iowa State. I think this team is, I mean, as of right now, like I said, I think things are on the trajectory upward. You fix issues. Adam, you mentioned it. LeVar Woods, if you're going to trust any coach to fix the special team stuff, it's LeVar Woods. Right now, I think this team is probably further away from 10-2 than they are closer to 10-2, right? Like if they keep playing this way, chances are they lose to a Wisconsin, even though Wisconsin got absolutely throttled by Alabama this weekend. Maybe not, because they're probably not going to have their starting quarterback though too. So that's maybe not Wisconsin, but like, geez, who
Illinois.
Else? Well, they don't play Illinois this year, do they?
Wow. I'm so used to the Big Ten West still.
Right.
Nebraska though, we can absolutely throw Nebraska in that mix. Yeah,
they're good. Yeah, they're really good. So
one more thing that I'll point out to that point though, Eliot, it's not that Troy was picking up 5 yards a pop on the ground. Iowa allowed 24 rushing yards to them for the game, and that was a real point of pride for that front seven. When I talked to Ethan Herkett after the game, it's not that Iowa's getting blown off the ball, right? It's not that Iowa can't stop the base stuff. The big play give ups are a problem. They're a big problem because they make, big plays are what any offense wants before a 14, 15-yard drive. Those are difficult to sustain. Running down the field untouched for 62, 63 yards is not as difficult to sustain, but it's not as if Iowa is incapable of running plan A. It's not as if Iowa's incapable of stopping their plan A. So it really does look at this point like just stuff that needs to be cleaned up, to use the players coach speak. But in this instance, we're talking about, for the most part, 3 bad snaps on what was otherwise a very solid performance by the defense and special teams for the most part. We'll talk to Jay Higgins almost certainly on Tuesday, and I'm sure he'll tell us about a dozen different plays where somebody missed an assignment or he missed an assignment. The coaches wouldn't agree with, half those assessments, but, that's Jay Higgins for you. But by and large, Iowa absolutely mauled Troy's defense. The front 4 in particular had a fantastic game. Eliot, you wrote about them, and that depth really started to show out, especially by the end of the game. And so, there's a lot to be encouraged by. It's just the big plays at this point. And it's a little bit akin to Washington D.C. in the 80s, where it's like, hey, crime's great except for the murders. But once the big plays get cleaned up, and again, who do you trust more than Phil Parker and LeVar Woods on that front? Then at the very least, we can sort of move past the whole. Aside from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play situation with this Hawkeye defense?
Yeah, I think I was looking when I was writing the 4 downs recap yesterday. I was looking at the defense, and you can't take away the big plays because they happened, and that's 14 points. That was a very significant part of the game. But if you look at the total picture, on the other drives Troy had in that game, they totaled like 80 some yards on 9 drives. Like every other drive was punt or the Jamari Harris interception. So they were not getting anything on a consistent basis. That's, I think, an area where you would really have some big red flags about the defense if they were able to consistently move the ball, maintain possession, drive down the field, that would be like, okay, what is going on here? The defense just isn't able to get stops. And they got a lot of stops yesterday. They just also had some very big, breakdowns. So, do you, like we've said, do you trust Phil Parker to try and fix those breakdowns? Absolutely. He's the best in the business at doing that. So, you have to have, I think, a lot of confidence in him uh, doing the best he can to address that. But the fact that there aren't, those underlying concerns about, just being able to get stops and get the offense off the field, that was absolutely there yesterday. It was just, the big plays, which were very big and more frequent than normal, obviously.
To wrap up talking about the defense, Adam, you said it, front four on the defensive line. That group of 7-8 guys that play, awesome. Brian Allen, to see him really start to put things together, and we've talked about this before, man, he's fun to watch, dude. Physical.
He's having a blast too.
Yeah. And Max Llewellyn too. Put that dude in a freaking blender on his late game sack. Those two guys, Ross, you and I talked about it before the season started. It's like those guys might be the dudes in that second unit to get after the quarterback. And yeah, we're seeing it. We're definitely seeing it. There's one thing we got to talk about before we get out of here, and that's the Brendan Sullivan packages, goal line packages, that resulted in 2 touchdowns for the Hawkeyes. St. Louis Hawk brought it up on our premium board and asked, is Sullivan the answer? And maybe we can get to that at some point, but I think what we just have to say is his mobility just adds a different dynamic down there, right? Like he could have scored himself on that touchdown to Addison Ostranga, but instead he flipped it and Addy scored. But it's just something the defense has to account for, right? And with Cade, he's shown more continued the ability to move the ball by himself this year in terms of taking it down and running it, but he hasn't really defaulted to it when maybe he should have in a couple snaps over these first few games. And I don't think you have to worry about that with Brendan Sullivan, but the defense has to worry about it, right? It's an RPO situation where you can trust him to tuck it and he can just basically walk in on certain snaps, I'm sure. His mobility is just something different. It's something different for the defense to account for, and it's something different that the offense can use to its advantage.
Yeah, exactly. Just him walking on the field, his legs are already a decoy, and or they're a possible weapon to use. And so, of course, he comes into the game on that very first goal line package. And Eliot, what does Troy do? Calls timeout. They're like, wait. And that was their last timeout of the first half, too. Let's remember that. They weren't really playing with a whole lot of reserve there, but it was uh-oh. And all he did was hand off to Kaleb Johnson. And, you got to give Johnson credit for powering into the end zone there. But the fact that they weren't able to key on where is the ball, like, where is he handing the ball to? Like, where is he pointing the ball? That just keeps those lanes open just that little split second longer. And with a back like Kaleb Johnson, and especially on that goal line, that little split second is all you need. And so, yeah, when we asked Cade about those goal line packages after the game, he's like, "Yeah, of course I knew they were coming," and the fact that it adds that extra dimension, that might be the difference between Iowa being an effective red zone team and not at this point. And obviously, it's all so much more complicated than that, and every coach will tell you the same thing. But ultimately, it's you can't really ignore this basic aspect of mobile QB in the red zone versus, less mobile QB. And we saw that result in touchdowns multiple times, Eliot, like you wrote about. And especially when you compare that to the way Iowa played in the red zone in those first 2 weeks, it's hard to ignore the results. It's just really hard to ignore the results. And it really does seem sustainable for the longer picture, even though they're, degree of difficulty is about to ramp up in the Big Ten. Ross, you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the timeout. When's the last time the Iowa offense scared another team into using a timeout. Like that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Speaking of like not in the last decade.
yeah. Yeah, that's a rare sight. But yeah, I think you guys are both totally on point. That this is just a really, it's another option. It adds some real flexibility to what the offense can do with his mobility, and it gives the defense more to think about, which is that's what you want down at that position of the field. Is you want the defense thinking and not sure about what's coming next, and how they're going to stop it. And anytime you can introduce doubt into the defense, especially in those situations, that's a positive. And yeah, I'm just really interested to see. I'm obviously very. It's good for the offense to score long touchdowns like they did yesterday. No one's going to fault that whatsoever. But it would also be interesting to see, more of those red zone situations and around the goal line. Seeing what Sullivan can do. What does that package look like? What are more of the plays that are available in there? We've just seen just the tip of the iceberg, it seems like, from what was used yesterday. So, you know, how far down the rabbit hole can we go with that particular package and what he can provide to the offense? I think will be something really interesting to see in Big Ten play.
Yeah, at some point you do have to show them, other teams on tape what it is they should be scared of too. And Sullivan has plenty of tape from his Northwestern days, but it's going to be a matter of how Iowa uses him. They've shown a little bit in that Troy game. Or excuse me, Ross, I agree. They're going to be shown a lot more. Eliot, what did you think?
It's what it is another thing to put on film, right? Like,
Mhm.
and Iowa ran it, I think 3 out of 4 times with Sullivan as the signal caller. And what did Kaleb Johnson say post game? He like gave away their hand a little bit, but he's like, "Well, we're going into next week, and Minnesota's going to think they're running it, or we're running it every time." Um, Additionally, once he really starts to show that speed and mobility, which we got a glimpse of yesterday, who's to say you don't use him in like a wildcat package with Kaleb Johnson as the guy taking snaps, or somebody else? Um, there's just a breadth of options with him because of his speed and because of his understanding of the game, right? Being a quarterback. So I think it's a wrinkle. Well, I can almost definitely say it's a wrinkle we wouldn't have seen with the previous offensive coordinator. Like Tim Lester is willing to make, adjustments like that. And who's to say, I I asked Kirk in the post game, is like, is this a situation where maybe we're going to see more of Brendan, between the 20s? And Kirk was like, "You're really trying to get me, huh?" And I really wasn't. He knew that, but
Yeah.
uh, it's something to follow because, man, it's just like a jolt to the offense, right? It's fun. And this ultimately, like, football is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be an entertaining product. And to put Sullivan on the field knowing he can do those different things is fun. And additionally, getting him snaps is just good going into next year, right? Because he's presumably going to be QB1 going into his final year of college eligibility. And having snaps in black and gold is valuable, whether it's late in the game, whether it's when it's meaningful, or what have you, especially when it's meaningful.
Yeah, on Tuesday, remember, I sort of asked Ferentz about the 2001, which is the last time that I can really remember Iowa going with a sort of a 2 QB system. Other than I guess there were some drives with Rudock and Beathard, but you really have to go back to 2001 prior to that for it to be a voluntary thing by the coaches. And that was Kyle McCann and a very green and inexperienced Brad Banks. That was not the 2002 level Brad Banks at that point. But having that playing time in 2001, getting his feet under him, playing against Big Ten defenses like Michigan, really helped him prepare for what was a truly great 2002 season. And so on Tuesday, I had asked Kirk, you know, because he had also mentioned, having Brad and talking about that 2002 season. I'm like, well, 2001, you're using guys or you were using that platoon to get the guys ready for the next season. And he said, a big part of that is just that, Banks added so much more of a dimension of mobility than McCann had. And he sort of downplayed how much different of a QB Sullivan was than McNamara. But, then we saw that package in there. So I think in as much as the two are different QBs, the more that you can get Sullivan on the field, not only in the red zone, but Eliot, like you tried to get Kirk to cop to in the middle of the field too, that really starts to put that pressure on the defense. It gets Sullivan ready for being a Tim Lester QB full-time next year, not just running a goal line package, but running a 50-yard line package, running all of the field package, against cover three and in quarters and all that. Yeah, I think it's a net benefit to him, and also it takes some pressure off of Cade McNamara, where you don't have to be the guy that's getting the ball across the 50, that's getting the ball between the 20s. The offense is not passing or failing simply based on you anymore, and so having that versatility, having that pressure on the defense will absolutely suit Iowa, better in the long term. Are they actually going to pull the trigger on that? We'll see, but we were saying that about, about goal line packages just last week. So when I asked Kirk about it on Tuesday, he said, everything's on the table. And so far that's been proven true, I would say, especially compared to, how it was in the Brian Ferentz era. So we'll see how much that playing time progresses, but so far they are very, they're putting their, they're walking the walk in terms of getting Sullivan on the field early.
We will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode of HawkCast, brought to you by iWithoutRivals.com and Hawkeye Beacon. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today. Join us on these podcasts and tap in with questions, thoughts, concerns after games, going into new games as well. And of course, you'll be privy to all the information we are in terms of behind the scenes stuff with football, men's basketball, women's basketball, recruiting, and so much more. While you're listening here, don't forget to subscribe as well, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You might be listening, but not subscribed. So do that and make sure you don't miss an episode. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you thought of the game against Troy yesterday, how you're feeling going into week 4. Once again, folks, my name is Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby for this episode of HawkCast, and we will see you next time.